there. Okay, and when we did this exercise, everybody would probably think it has to be an animal that eats pork or that eats raw meat, and so it would be unlikely that it could be horse or a lamb or something like this. But I think you got quite a few interesting information in an epidemiological way, and let's have a look at this in detail now, just in summary. Up here, I put a little picture, which one of my former students who took part in this course and who is working for the a veterinary university in Hanover, especially made for us, because this is a picture of a trichinella. It looks like a piece of art, but actually it's a piece of a Trichinella, Trichinella spiralis, but we will see at the last slide as well. Okay. Thierry Ancel, I know him personally, he, was the person who did this investigation originally. He's a parasitologist and he doesn't have much knowledge about epidemiology. Now, yes, he does, but not when he did this investigation. And therefore, he did a good job, I think, but there will be a few things for us to discuss just briefly. Okay, in the synthesis. It was Friday, the 16th of August. If you know something about France, you know, I don't know if you've ever heard, but on the 15th of August is when everybody leaves for holidays. So it was the day after everybody left for holidays on a Friday afternoon, 5 o'clock. I wonder what he was still doing in his office. Anyway, this is when the first information came to him concerning this outbreak. And many people say like, hey, do all outbreaks really happen on a Friday afternoon? This is a publication in Communicable Disease and Public Health where people had a look whether outbreaks tend to happen on Friday afternoons or only get reported. But in reality, it feels like this. It's more a myth. Okay, so what happened? At that time, for about 100 years, no epidemic was reported for this disease. Thus, no surveillance system was available. So nobody, because nothing happened for such a long time. Suddenly, 35 sporadic cases were reported for 100 years, during 100 years' time, caused by wild boar or pork consumption. As I said, it must be pork. Everybody would think. Okay. Horse meat-related trichinellosis outbreaks were described, a few, one in 75, two in 75 and one in 76. Strange. They were still being regarded as somehow strange. And natural infection of horses is unknown, is actually unknown till today. So how do we conclude, or what do we conclude actually from the investigation? You saw the epidemic curves, and I was in one group when they were discussing it, and you said like, it looks like a common source. At least it's not person-to-person transmission, that's for sure, like a common source spreading over several weeks. So maybe it's a mixture of a point source and a common source, because there's only one, this point, but this point is really long, to say it this way. Now, as we know, probably it's related to the horse carcasses, and they are big, so lots of people can eat over a longer period of time. So therefore, everybody who said it looks like a bit like a point source or it looks like a common source, both are right, because in this case, it's a mixture of both. Okay. Then I was in one group where you discussed the geographical distribution, and I recommended in this group to look at, if you're ever investigating an outbreak, go and have a look at it. Because here in Merlin, it looks a bit more spread out here, and here in Paris 14, it looks closer by. But it depends really how's the housing style in this area. So you might probably learn a lot and you're going to be able to interpret the data much better once you really have a look. Big apartment blocks or single houses, you really have to have a look. Okay. So then you did this investigation. Before we talk about the results, I want to discuss, start like this morning. What kind of study design did you use? Or did Pierre Ancel and you as well, then in this case, use for investigating these two outbreaks? What kind of study design was it? Oh, you know that.
Case control.
Case control. Shuruk, yes, please explain.
Yeah, however, we discussed that firstly we have to do a cross-sectional study like for a short period of time to know how big the problem is, and then we can go for the case control study.
Okay. So why did you do a case control? There are two settings actually. There are two settings. You know the one in the general community and the one in the prison. For the general community, it's like the Q fever. Absolutely, they're spread in the community, and I agree with you. You probably need to do a case control study. There's no alternative. What about the prison? Do we have a defined cohort, a group who probably did not have trichinellosis at the beginning, and then following over time, several of them became ill? Isn't this a setting in the prison? Hatem, please.
Yeah, I think it can be a historical cohort as well.
Right, right. Actually, because there is a cohort, there's practically a natural cohort given, but you can just have a look at who was in the prison. They will have records on who has been incarcerated at that time. And using this, you could also, as Hatem just told us, you could use this as a historical cohort and just do a cohort study, and you would be able to analyze, for example, relative risk and attributable risk and so on. I think you remember from last week. Nevertheless, that's why I'm saying that Thierry Ancel was probably just thought about case control study. He probably didn't even know a different study design. But under these circumstances, it would have been maybe a good idea to use a cohort study design in the prison. Anyway, okay, so then you got to the point. Here are the results from Melun, meat consumption, first outbreak of trichinellosis. And you got the numbers for the exposure numbers for cases and controls. And how can we read this data? Because this is taken from the article they published, but you will see something like this. So cases, how many got exposed, controls, how many got exposed, and you see that that all cases almost ate everything in the prison, here in the prison setting, and the controls were slightly different. And the odds ratio here to be calculated is seems to be undefined. Why is it undefined? Why is it difficult in this study to calculate the odds ratio for the horse meat consumption? Okay, so then ask me this question. Okay, so it's not clear, because if you have a look here, for example, you've got 100% of the cases got exposed, but how many cases did not get exposed? 0. So in your 2 by 2 table, you will end up with a 0, which will lead you, get you into problems. Do I have it here? No. Okay. But this means, under the undefined means extremely big, indefinite.
Infinity.
Indefinitely. Yeah, indefinite. And so is indefinite bigger than 1 or smaller than 1?
smaller then, because in the second slide they added 0.5. If we see the slide,
I guess it should absolutely bigger than one.
Yes, it is actually bigger, indefinitely big. It's really big, very big. We can't define because we don't have, we have a zero in one of the boxes. So divided by something divided by zero is definitely really big. It's definitely much bigger than one. So it seems to be a high risk factor here for horses. And the p-value also gives us, says this is significant, highly significant, while all the other food sources are not significant. And so this must be really big. In the exercise, were you using fudge factors now? Did you get, anyway, for those ones who didn't get that far anyway. So if you have, what do you do if you have in a 2x2 table, one of the fields is if in a 2x2 table, if one of the fields is a zero, you cannot divide anymore. A trick for practical work, I'm not, or we are not having an exam, but I wouldn't ever ask it in exam, but just to tell you from a practical point of view. Indefinite is big, yes, but we would like to have an idea of how big it is. So then I would recommend to add to each of the 4 boxes an 0.5. And then you can calculate, you know, it's a fudge factor. It's not real because you don't have half people. At least they won't answer your questionnaire. You know that you've modified it a bit, but you get an idea how big it is, and it's probably pretty big. So for the horse, for this study, it was possible. Then later on, easier. In the exercise, you were also looking at the, in the third case control study, something which we would call, you were looking for a dose-response relationship. People who had less frequent than once a month horse meat, once a month, once every week, several times a week. And you can also calculate for each of these levels the odds ratio. And do you see any trends? Do you see any trend obvious here? What does it mean? What do you see, Shuruk?
It means that if you are eating more per week, it means that you are more likely to get the disease.
Exactly. Jennifer agrees with you. And this means this is what we call a dose-response relationship. More exposure, more likely to develop the disease.
So which response?
Dose, response. The higher the dose, the more likely the response. And here you see, for example, for those people who had it several times a week, there was an odds ratio of 334. What does this mean? How can you put this into words? Cases where more than 300 times more likely to have eaten horse meat several times a week than controls. This is 334 times. That's a lot, isn't it? I mean, it looks like it, yeah. Can it be something else? Or what do you think? Or is this almost convincing?
I guess it's convincing as it's related to the number of larvae in the abdomen. So the higher you get, the higher you will develop, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. This is another special factor. So obviously, we now have a strong epidemiological relationship between horse meat consumption and trichinellosis. Those of you who couldn't finish yet, please have a look at it again, because this is one of the strongest associations you will ever see. It's really, really strong. Nevertheless, is it sufficient to confirm that horse meat is the cause of the epidemic? Do we know for sure? Because does any one of you have horses or has ever been horse riding and know something about horses? Oh my God, you don't have sheep, you don't have horses. What do you do? What is your hobby? Mian?
I grew up in a farm with horses, but we did not eat horse meat.
No, I didn't want to ask that. No. But so you know a little bit about horses, Mian. It's good. We need an expert here about horses. Have you ever seen, when you grew up there, have you ever seen that a horse was eating raw meat? Maybe
No.
maybe chewing on a mouse or anything like this?
No.
And you're right, because horses don't eat raw meat. They can't even digest from their anatomy. It's impossible. It's not really, it's not, it can be everybody, almost everybody I talk to who knows a lot about horses feel like the interesting figures, but horses don't eat raw meat. Anshu, what do you think?
Yeah, they are herbivores as far as my horses are, aren't they?
Sorry?
Horses are herbivores, right?
Absolutely, exactly. So that's a point. I mean, the doctor from St. Petersburg, she was sure it can be only the pork because pigs eat meat, but horses don't. It's impossible. Except that we have a very, very strong evidence now here, a very strong association, 330 something times more likely to eat horse meat often among the cases than among the controls. How can this be? Does it confirm it? Therefore, on our last day, I will talk about the Bradford Hill criteria, and just they are kind of, they should help us to weigh whether an association can be causal or not. And just to put a few information in here, some of those factors, let me cite some of them, like for example, strength. Strong association means more likely to be a real association than weak associations. And we have very strong associations. In the community study, an odds ratio of 169 and so on, very strong. So yes, strength is there. Is it consistent? One of the things you should never trust the first single study, even though it gets into the media and you hear a study has shown the perfect treatment for corona, you will have no problems with anymore if you use this drug. If this is going to be shown, will be interesting, but it should be shown in different studies. Horse meat and trichinellosis has been seen in several studies here, giving similar, very strong results. Is it specific? Horse meat and only horse meat was associated with disease occurrence. All the other meats we tested, and they were all not associated. A temporal relationship is very important. Almost all cases have consumed horse meat within 3 weeks before onset of the disease. So it was there before the disease, the exposure. And dose response effect, and this is what we just saw, like the odds ratio increases with frequency of horse meat consumption, indicates it's rather likely that this is maybe true. And in an experiment, those of you who could read the prologue already, they know 9 horses have been successfully infected with Trichinella in an experiment. If you force them, if you into their intestines, to consume something like this, it is possible. But is it coherent with the current knowledge? Not really very much. And plausible for Mian, who has grown up on a farm with horses, it's absolutely not plausible, because those of us who are not so sure, we just don't know enough about horses. But everybody who knows about horses, it's unlikely that they got infected. But what do we think now? Can can horse meat be the cause for this outbreak? I think the epidemiology shows that there's a very strong association, and it's probably linked. We just don't know how, but we know that it happens, but we don't know how it happens. What were the consequences in France at that time? The medical consequences were there was a case fatality rate of 5 per 1,000, so some people died. There were even more people who got neurological consequences of this. Economically, there were medical and social costs and 25% decrease in horse meat sales as well. Of course, people realized, okay, how do you eat raw horse meat? How do the French or Italians eat raw horse meat? You probably won't find this in India or in the Philippines because you eat meat differently. Yes, Anshu, please.
So I wanted to ask from the previous slide, this temporal relationship I was not able to get.
Sorry, which relationship?
Temporal relationship, this one. Temporal relationship.
Temporal means like you have to have the exposure first and the outcome after. So you need to make sure that, therefore, a cohort study is usually better than a cross-sectional one, because you have the healthy people first, then exposure, then disease. This is very important. Okay, but about yeah, I'll talk about this. Okay, the horse meat consumption decreased. Administrative, there was a ban on horse meat importation and international regulations in Europe as a common market. If this would happen again, China and the US and whoever, India would not import meat from the whole of Europe, even though it only occurred in Paris. So it had strong implications. It also had strong juridical implications. Patients sued the butchers and the administration. The butchers sued the dealers sued the slaughterhouses. The administration also the slaughterhouses, the dealers, the administration. So one professional group which was really happy were the solicitors. So they had a lot of work. Anyway, so it had a strong impact. But how could horse meat be contaminated? That's a good question. Or how can, answer this first. It cannot be by contact in grinder. So if you have some horse meat lying on your table and some pork next to it, the Trichinella cannot crawl across because they are encapsulated in the meat. So it cannot be like this.
So is it possible that the knife that we use to cut, is it possible to get from there?
Yeah, but it's such a small, would be such a small amount, not explaining our hundreds of cases. I mean, maybe one or so, yeah. Okay, by mixing with parasized pork meat. So if you have raw minced horse meat, which is illegally extended because pork is cheaper than horse meat, maybe. But yeah, also not realistically in this situation. Probably during horse lifetime is most likely. By ingestion of parasitized food, or at least 1 week before, and this would have to take at least 1 week before slaughtering, because the parasites need some time to spread in the body. Okay, but how do you ever eat raw horse meat? Do you know any dish where raw horse meat can be eaten?
Yeah, it's like the form of cold cuts. I ate it before in Belgium.
Ah, okay.
It's like the pork. It's like the ham, exactly.
Exactly, something like carpaccio or so, for example, is often eaten, and that's why I mean, in your religion you don't eat pork meat, for example, to prevent trichinellosis, for example, at least in some ways. But Yeah, unfortunately, it can also occur in other meats like horse meat, as we know nowadays. So it's a good try, but nothing is 100% perfect in life. Okay, so how can we, if you want to have carpaccio, yes, how can you, or if you want to eat horse meat, to say it this way, the best way is cooking it above 65 degrees for 5 minutes or until meat changes from pink to gray. So if you do it, if you eat a steak of horse meat, well done, no problem. Okay, not everybody likes horse meat though, Jan. I'm no problem. But if for those ones who want to eat it, it's true. Or you freeze it, but at a very low temperature, minus 25 degrees Celsius for 10 days, and the slices should be not too thick. Then the parasites would also die. Otherwise, they can survive. And nowadays, testing of carcasses for infection is obligatory in most countries. And the last slide, just to show you again the Trichinella in detail. For the, yeah, most of you are medical doctors, so you recognize this here. This is a, what is this? Is this pathological?
Are they larvae?
This is a vessel with blood cells inside. So this is normal.
Eosinophily.
No, just erythrocytes.
I know the blood cells. Yeah, that's true.
But next to it, you see this blue one is colored,
Yeah.
tissue, and right in the middle
The egg.
it looks like a spiral, and because it's cut, that's why you see here different places where it was cut. Actually, what I think trichinellosis, I mean, if you have a preparation like this, it's pretty beautiful, isn't it? The trichinella, but the disease is not. But anyway,
No.
at least to end on a positive note. Any questions about our exercise today and about outbreak investigations? If Yinwa, please, first.
Okay, I actually raised my hand when we were